Today, I wanted to talk about Colossal, the 2017 film written and directed by Nacho Vigalondo. The film stars Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis, along with supporting performances from Dan Stevens, Austin Stowell, and Tim Blake Nelson. It follows the story of Anne Hathaway's character, Gloria, an unemployed writer living in New York City. Turned to alcohol and partying, her life begins to spiral. Her boyfriend, Tim, being less than understanding, kicks her out, and left with no other choice, Gloria decides to move back to her old hometown, her old childhood home. The town is more or less exactly as she'd left it, and she barely goes a day without running into an old childhood friend, Oscar, who runs a bar in town. As things begin to become more normal for Gloria, news breaks. Against all explanation, a giant monster has materialized in Seoul. And as if that wasn't enough, Gloria finds she is inextricably linked to the monster. I will say, I was surprised by Colossal. The trailers for the movie convinced me it was worth following, and the director's previous efforts were completely up my alley. So you could definitely say I had high expectations going in. The surprise for me was that, for the most part, Colossal went above and beyond my expectations. Light years beyond them, actually. In fact, the first thing I wanted to do after seeing the film was to immediately see it again, which I never, ever do. I think Colossal is pretty perfect, which means there are loads of things I could talk about, but I specifically want to talk about two of the things Colossal does so tremendously well. And those are, firstly, how it builds its narrative around what I call the monster metaphor, and secondly, how it builds its characters through exceptional and subtle performances. Colossal's narrative is carefully built around its characters, which I'll come back to in a moment, and what I'd call the monster metaphor. In the fiction, the monster is a literal monster towering over Seoul, but to the keen-eyed viewer, the monster is also a metaphor for something. There are some different interpretations of what it represents specifically, but to me, it quite clearly is a metaphor for substance abuse. Monsters as metaphor is not a new concept. Godzilla, Frankenstein, zombies, vampires, and even the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park. They all present as common science fiction or horror antagonists, but also represent something outside of the fiction. And Colossal's monster fits right in among them. Where Godzilla represented the atomic bomb, Colossal's monster represents substance abuse, and the metaphor is pointed directly at our two primary characters, Gloria and Oscar, both of whom are struggling with substance, or more specifically, alcohol abuse. This, of course, becomes a much bigger problem when Gloria discovers she is somehow connected to the monster. Her actions are reflected in it, both literally and metaphorically, so the repercussions of her actions are severe and sobering. It isn't just on Gloria, though. Oscar is our second primary character, and his struggles with alcohol abuse are as much a part of the narrative as Gloria's, for better or for worse. To put all things simply, Colossal posits a question that I'm sure you already know the answer to. Is a lack of control associated with alcohol abuse somehow acceptable if its result is physical or emotional violence? Tying in with physical and emotional violence are other themes like entitlement, abusive relationships, and toxic masculinity. It's tough subject matter to broach, but thankfully it's treated with utmost respect from the cast and crew. Colossal's dedication to character is exemplified in the way its performances show rather than tell. It teaches us about its characters by showing who they are. Not what they do or how they describe themselves, but who they are when no one is watching. Except us, the viewer. We are always watching, so who they are is specifically portrayed or performed for us. These performances allow us to build a connection with the character, so that when a giant monster shows up, we care. Without a connection, it's just some odd people and an odd-looking monster. Take Gloria, for example. She's unemployed and struggling with alcohol and in a sort of emotionally abusive relationship. But that's not who she is, and over the course of the movie, we discover who she is. Anne Hathaway, of course, killed it here. Her performance is full of nuance and soul, and as hard as it must have been to act as though one is connected to a massive monster in South Korea, she pulled it off pretty amazingly. And then there's Oscar, who is arguably the more complicated character. He is similar to Gloria in many ways, or at least that's how things begin. But unlike Gloria, he's a lot more private, keeping most details about himself to himself. That is, until things begin to fall apart. After learning about Gloria's connection to the monster, his true colors begin to show, and we learn who Oscar really is. It's pretty heavy, and I'm not gonna spoil it, but I do have to say, Jason Sudeikis is not someone that I thought would bring this frightening level of intensity to the film, and I was absolutely wrong about that. His performance is easily as subtle as Anne Hathaway's, and just as high caliber, although very different in nature. Throughout the film, it becomes exceedingly easy to understand this world and these characters because of how fully realized and layered they are. Not only in the way they're written and directed, but in the finer details of the performance as well. It really is something to behold. I wanted to talk about these two things specifically because, to me, these are the things that make the movie so great. It's not just a monster movie. It builds its narrative around the monster metaphor. That metaphor allows for a staggering amount of meaning and depth to be extrapolated from its narrative. And the focus on characters isn't just for show. The actors' subtle performances allow the viewer to make a connection with the character, so that pretty much everything that happens to the character is meaningful. These are also why the film was so surprising to me, because it completely overshot my expectations of what a monster movie with Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis could be. It also manages to be my favorite thing Nacho Vigalondo has done so far, which is impressive given his already stellar track record. As you can probably tell at this point in the video, I really can't recommend Colossal enough.